Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'd like to give you a brief welcome before we get started. I'm Maya Elenevsky, the Events and Outreach Manager here at the Center for Contemplative Mind and Society with the Association for Contemplative Mind in Higher Education. The ACMHE is a multidisciplinary academic association with a membership of over 700 educators, staff, students, and researchers committed to the transformation of higher education through contemplative methods. The ACMHE is an initiative of the Center for Contemplative Mind and Society. I'd like to welcome you to our 2019 Contemplative Education webinar, I Got Soul Part 2, the Soul-Centered Framework and Practices, with Dr. Shelly Harrell. Building upon the June 2019 webinar Introducing Soulfulness, this webinar focuses on the application of soulfulness to contemplative practice. Now I'd like to give you a little background about our presenter. Dr. Shelly Harrell is a psychologist whose work focuses on individual, relational, and collective well-being in the context of culture and oppression. Her current research involves the development of a resilience-oriented group intervention integrating contemplative, communal, and empowerment change processes. She has been a professor at Pepperdine University's Graduate School of Education and Psychology for 20 years, where she primarily teaches and trains students in their clinical psychology doctoral program. Her applied work includes workshops and consulting on topics including culturally attuned psychotherapeutic interventions, the dynamics of difference, intergroup relations, and cultural diversity in the training of mental health professionals. She introduced soulfulness in the Journal of Contemplative Inquiry in 2018. At several conferences, including C-Minds in 2018. Dr. Harrell has numerous publications and professional presentations in the areas of racism-related stress, intergroup relations, race and culture in clinical supervision, and conceptualizing the role of culture in well-being. She conducts meditation workshops and classes in the predominantly African American and Latinx communities of Los Angeles. She also has a small psychotherapy practice. We are extremely excited to be working with her again today. Please welcome Shelly.
Hi, I'm glad to be back and do part 2 to give you a little better feel this time for the interventions and the practices. So I am going to check out a video and I'll be back at the end for Q&A, and we will go ahead and get started. So the primary goals, as Maya mentioned, are to present the core elements of the soul-centered practice framework, give us that grounding. I kind of went over it quickly in the introductory webinar in June, but I really want to give you a little more meat to that. Want to focus in on the 3 phases of the soul approach to meditation and contemplative practices, and then spend most of the time describing and demonstrating, hopefully, a few practices, depending on our time, based on the soul-centered practice framework. And then I want to end by discussing some of the complexity of considering culture in contemplative practices and other interventions, including issues of cultural appropriation and coloniality. So just to ground us in what soulfulness is, for those of you who might not have attended the first part in June. So I'm really offering soulfulness as an orientation to meditation and other contemplative practices like journaling, creative expression, conscious movement, and really the idea of soulfulness is to center those practices in contact with soul. So the methods focus on providing opportunities for really listening in to the stirrings and callings of soul, the whisperings of soul wisdom, and being deeply touched, moved, and inspired through soul level experiencing. So really one of the taglines for the resilience intervention that Maya mentioned is from stressed out to energized within. And that's really the character of soulfulness, is feeling aliveness within, feeling energized within. And so the practices aim to enhance both inner attunement and resonance with the soulfulness of others. I mean, we know we can feel soul, that sense of aliveness from others. So another important characteristic about soulfulness is it honors a feeling level knowingness, intuition, emotional experience. And that's important. So we want to kind of move away from the cognitive and intellectual sources of knowledge and tune in to soul level. So the working definition that I offered of soulfulness is on this slide: emerging from the convergence of spiritual, psychological, and cultural perspectives on soul. Soulfulness is conceptualized as a quality of experiencing life in a deeply connected and connecting way. The theme of connection is woven throughout. An enlivened inner attunement that illuminates lived experience and radiates into outer expression. So you think about soul music, for example. It's a testimony of lived experience that radiates out and emanates out and can be felt by others. So it's this interconnected, soulful aliveness that's often experienced as resonating, liberating, life-enhancing, spiritually infused energy of deep connectivity and inspired expression. So taking this definition, and again, it's a working definition, I wanted to begin to build a framework for kind of incorporating soulfulness into practices. So the framework is meant to be a guide for both development and implementation of practices that are informed by this notion of soulfulness. So the practices are really characterized by this soul-centered approach, which is an acronym. S and O is soulfulness-oriented, U is unitive, and L is liberatory. And I had presented this in the previous webinar, so I'm not going to go over the acronym in detail. But what I'll share with you today is a way that when I'm teaching this, I kind of capture the acronym. So the key is to be and to see so that we can all be free, right? So the key is to be, to really make contact with the totality and authenticity of who we are, sort of taking into account both our humanness and our capacity for transcendence and our spiritness, and to see, right? So that full sensing and experiencing of life, being present in the present, being woke to what is. So seeing more clearly, seeing with more consciousness, with more awareness, right? So the we really encompasses that unitive aspect of the soul-centered framework, communal orientation, deep interconnectedness, a sense of collective responsibility. And then so that we can all be free, which captures the L, the liberatory aspect: mental, emotional, relational, spiritual, and socio-political liberation. So we think of what does it mean to orient to contemplative practice in a soul-centered way. This captures the primary elements. So the framework itself, and I really refer you to the 2018 article introducing soulfulness in the C-Mind Journal, Journal of Contemplative Inquiry. And so the framework itself has 4 components that can be used to really ground both the development and implementation. So contemplative practices, have a common foundation that broadly include things like present moment awareness, compassion and non-judgment, sensory awareness, being present with our sensory experience, that notion of beginner's mind, really seeing things anew, and that sense of balance and calm and elements of concentration. So those fundamental processes characterize the interventions. And then what is added, or what's more distinctive, is bringing in the core soulfulness processes, which I've identified the 8 C's of soulfulness. And this is the cultural infusion of that African-centered grounding of soulfulness. The centering in soul level experiencing, the explicit liberatory emphasis, and again, across all levels of oppression, right? Societal, relational, internalized. And so these are the qualities, this component, these 8 C's of soulfulness are the qualities that provide the soulful sensibility of the practices and really characterize the necessary elements for something to be considered a soulfulness practice. And then the framework includes 2 other components, which are the what of the SCPs, or the soul-centered practices, and those are domains that organize the focus of the practices, and then the how, right? The specific strategies of what we do in the practices, what's utilized within the domains. This table here is from the 2018 article, and it presents the 8 C's of soulfulness: communion, centering, congruence, calling, consciousness, courage, creativity, and coexistence. And again, I'll refer you to the article as well as to part 1 of the webinar from last month, where I go into this in a little more detail. And I believe the slides are already available on the CMind website from part 1. So the application domains, I'm going to spend a couple of minutes more here on the domains and the modalities to really kind of give you a feel for the what and the how of soul-centered practices. So the domains include meditative practices, and this is a primary way that soulfulness is delivered, is guided meditations and visualizations, and I refer to these often as soulitations. Practices that are wisdom-centered, that utilize diverse sources of wisdom, and that's really for centering, for giving a launching place for exploration, to stimulate and inspire. And wisdom is collective. We all have some inkling of wisdom within us. So it's also for illuminating and cultivating the wisdom that is within, that we can access. Another important domain of soul-centered practices are expressive creative practices. So expression of soul calling, what's calling in our soul, from our soul, through art, music, movement, innovation, and also practices that facilitate connection with the creative expression of others. So remember, important in the definition is soulfulness involves this resonance between us, kind of soul to soul connection and resonance with the soulfulness of others. So the expressive creative practices are important in really bringing that element of soulfulness to life. Another important application domain are relational communal practices. So those facilitate that experience of deep connection, of belonging, of feeling heard, seen, understood, affirming our shared reality. So these often involve listening, dialogic practices, sharing our stories. There's also the domain of experiential and daily practices. And that's really bringing a contemplative soul, right? So soulfulness-oriented, unitive, liberatory orientation into our lived experience and daily activities. So how we move through the world is characterized by intentional soulfulness, intentional engagement, and exposing ourselves to moving experiences that touch the soul. That may be in nature, or you know, I am very connected to dance, and I was a dancer early in my life, and so seeing dance touches my soul so deeply, and I am a healthier, more engaged person when I have more experiences to witness and engage in dance. And then finally, a domain of practice that's very important is spirit-infused practices, and this may be very important to many people. The inclusion of transcendent elements, such as calling on ancestors, practicing the presence of God or spirit, or specific religious grounding. And so it's important. It's obviously, this is not relevant to everyone, but it's important that we have practices that affirm that domain for people. So those are the application domains. That's the what of soulfulness, of soul-centered practices. So the how, the modalities. What do we actually do? So meditation, right? And I defined that in the previous webinar. For me, it's really about opening temporal space, making some time, you know, opening mental, emotional space for directing and regulating attention and energy. And meditation is in the service of awakening, illuminating, enlivening, liberating, and manifesting soul in this context. The other really critical modality of soul-centered practice is music. And we use it in so many different ways for anchoring and grounding, centering, relaxation, facilitating connection to soul level experience. And music, you know, I'll say a little bit more about it on another slide, but it's about touching the soul and opening the heart. Other modalities include movement, experiencing and expressing body-soul integration, meeting, that's that relational piece, deep soul-to-soul listening, and the meeting, not just facilitating meeting of persons, but also come into a place of meeting with nature, with transcendent phenomena, right? So that meeting is about connection. Another modality is meaning, right? Facilitating exploration and inquiry and interrogation, you know, of our meanings, of our values, our beliefs, our purpose, illuminating that inner wisdom. And then a modality of making, and that's about expression, discovery, creating, innovating. So there's the domains in which we practice, and then how we practice, what we're actually doing in soulfulness work. So again, I want to speak, because of the centrality of music, I want to speak about a little more about music as a central modality in soulfulness practices and interventions. So, you know, soul music, pathway to soul level experiencing. And this is just a list of things that, you know, that music does, you know, obviously expresses, touches, heals the soul. And when we think about the foundation of soulfulness for me, or where it came from, for me, was really an attempt to you know, consider culture in contemplative practice, and music is a significant vehicle for the expression and transmission of culture. Music connects us to human experience, to shared human experience across time and place. There's that resonance, affirmation, identification, you know, communicates collective wisdom, ancestrally, right? Affirmation of current experiences as well. Music facilitates experiencing. It takes us out of our heads, out of intellectualizing, out of the cognitive and mental, and brings us to that feeling level experiencing. You know, I know when I hear music, I need to move. and so music can also connect us to our bodies. An experience of flow, right? That immersion in the moment, which is incredible. Music facilitates processing and working through. And I think I talked about this a little bit in part one as well. Listening to a song over and over and over again can be a way of processing our experiences. And of course, music is healing and transformative. So within SCPs, within soul-centered practices, music is often used as a transition and centering strategy. Before meditation, before a variety of practices. So now I want to turn us to some examples and demonstrations, and pretty much be spending most of the rest of the webinar with some examples and demonstrations of the practices. And I invite you to participate in whatever you feel comfortable participating in. All right. So again, kind of building from the centrality of music, I will often start a workshop or class with music. And this is, or even an exercise, a soulfulness practice, a soulfulness exercise with music. And it really helps to transition people from out there to in here, and helps to establish the vibe, so to speak. So, you know, music, again, is an expression of culture. You know, it communicates something about the cultural orientation and the inclusiveness of the event or class or workshop or practice. And you know, I think sometimes we're not always as intentional about how the background music we're using, what it's communicating about the cultural orientation of what's happening. And I tend to choose music that centers the drum, or that has an African-American soul R&B feeling, African-American spirituals. The drum is so important in African diasporic cultures, and in many other cultures as well. And so the intentionality, depending on who I'm working with, the persons that are in attendance, the intentionality of the music choice is important. I commonly use and play background music as people are arriving, again, being very intentional about that. And I often use the tambourine or a drum to signal that the event or activity is about to begin or end. And of course, I also use chimes and bells and gongs and singing bowls, but I tend to feature the tambourine and the drum because they communicate, again, something different about the cultural orientation of the setting. So in ongoing gatherings where I'm seeing the same group of people or a common group of people regularly, I'll typically choose a song to use every single time as part of our opening ritual. And that depends on the group. You know, sometimes they're instrumental, sometimes they have lyrics. Now, and often there's a theme even for single workshops, and I'll choose an opening song to reflect that theme. So I want to share an example with you. And those of you who are at part one will remember that I shared some reflections on the river, and I often will present the idea of soulfulness practice as an invitation to the river. So I want to invite you to move your body into a comfortable position, and if you feel comfortable, to close your eyes. And as you listen, really feel the music. Allow yourself to really try to be within the music. And if you're so inspired, it's it's okay to move your body as well. So I'm going to kind of switch applications here. Close your eyes. And this is an example of an entry song that I would use. So that is again, an example of a song that I use very frequently to just bring people into the rhythm, invite people to this notion of coming to the river. And you know, what I find is when there's a familiar opening, like a ritual, an opening ritual, it really begins to create a communal and collective experience that is particularly powerful with an ongoing group. Another song that I will sometimes use to introduce an activity or a workshop is an African American spiritual. Probably most of you are familiar with, and you might need to increase your volume on this one. I'm just going to play a little clip, and the version I tend to use is by Sweet Honey in the Rock. And there's some speaking at the very beginning that's so important. Again, inviting people to wade in the water, to in some ways take a risk to step into troubled waters. So again, if you feel comfortable to close your eyes so you can really listen in deeply.
And when there is a promise of a storm, if you want change in your life, walk into it. If you get on the other side, you will be different. And if you want change in your life and you're avoiding the trouble, you can forget it. So Harriet would say, wade on in the water. It's going to really be troubled water. Wade in the water. Wade in the water, children. Wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Wade in the water. Wade in the water, children. Wade in the water. My God's gonna trouble the water. Oh, see the
So if you were able to catch the words at the beginning of the song, she talks about walking into the storm rather than avoiding the troubled waters that are inevitable. part of the message is that life is going to include challenges, and we have a choice of stepping into those and engaging those or avoiding them. And she says, don't avoid, but wade into it. So I think, I use that song both for the feel of it culturally, but also for the message. So this process of setting intention is another aspect of soul-centered practices. And there's mantras and chants. And, you've heard, through the internet memes, you've got to feel it to heal it, those sorts of things. I think name it to claim it, or name it to tame it. Name it to tame it is out there. And I actually, that lands not so well with me. And I'll share a bit about that, because it's important to think about how what we deliver is received and how it lands in cultural, historical, collective, sociopolitical context. And so the notion of taming is problematic in some ways. Right. So for members of historically oppressed populations, a message has often been to shut up, fundamentally, to not get so emotional, to, why are you getting so upset? This notion of taming emotions, taming experience, silencing oneself. We tame wild animals, so there's a dehumanization element that can be connoted by this notion of taming, and so I tend to kind of want to use a different sentiment around the importance of naming something. And so I've chosen the rhyming of reclaim, naming something to reclaim it, being able to see things that maybe are out of our normal vision, and get in closer contact with our experience personally and collectively, and in particular, perhaps our strengths, our wisdom, our sense of who we really are in terms of our value and worth, and to name those things and reclaim them. So this, I developed the chant, but clearly it's inspired by various sayings, most of which have unknown origins, internet memes, and my own creative expression. The last one there, we invigorate to liberate, is a clear reference to soulfulness. So we need to come alive in order to participate in our own liberation and in the liberation of others. So that part of the damage of oppression is the damage to our souls. Duran and colleagues have written about this concept of soul wounds from a Native American perspective, and it's the impact of historical trauma on the soul wounding. And when our souls are wounded, there's some life that is sucked out of us. There's a disconnection fundamentally from ourselves, from our culture, from a sense of being part of humanity even. And so part of some of the intent of soulfulness practices are to invigorate, to enliven. So that's the kind of the underlying rationale for that particular piece of the chant. So we would say, we see it to free it, we feel it to heal it, we go through it to get to it, we name it to reclaim it, and we invigorate to liberate. So now I want to share some specific practices with you that are used in interventions or activities informed by soul-centered practice, by the SCP framework. And one of them is called soul songs. And this is a reflective practice. And it connects to that notion of expressive and creative processes of others, can be very resonant and experiential. So again, I'm going to invite you to just sort of take a deep breath. And this process involves deep listening to a song. And I'll talk through the remainder of that, the practice, after we listen to a clip from this song, I'll Rise by Ben Harper. And it's based on the poem And Still I Rise by Maya Angelou.
You may write me down in a history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me down in the very dirt, and still like the dust I'll rise. Does my happiness upset you? Why are you best with gloom? 'Cause I laugh like I got an oil well pumping in my living room. So you may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, and I'll rise, I'll rise, I'll rise, out of the shacks of history's shame, up from a past rooted in pain. I'll rise, I'll rise, I'll rise. Now did you?
So the process of this practice involves intentional song selection that considers the culture and context of where you are. It's meant to be culturally syntonic and purposeful. Usually start with some centering breaths as transition, and give some instruction on deep listening, on whole soul listening, and then play the song. And then we invite people to process their experience, to really kind of share what happened during the listening, what arose in experience during the listening, somatically. You know, what was experienced in your body? You know, what emotions arose? Were there associations or memories or connection to experience that came up? And then we'll invite people to journal or engage in discussion that are connected to the song that was played. So what are you rising from might be a journaling prompt in association with this particular song. What are you rising from? What does it mean to you to rise? What will rising look like for you? And then close it out. So really drawing upon the power of music to connect to experience, and the power of music in terms of being such a place of resonance. So a focus, as I mentioned, in terms of both the what we do and how we do it is meditation, and I shared in the first webinar the orientation of soulfulness oriented meditation is meditation for liberation. The foundation of the meditative practices is in fundamental mindfulness work, centering in here and now experience, and then building from there. So let's kind of move through this. I just looked at the time, and it always goes by much more quickly than I would like. In general, when I'm teaching soulfulness meditation processes, there's a lot going on, but I've distilled it into something that is familiar for many people. This process of stop, drop, and roll, right? That many of participants have been exposed to in elementary school of what to do if there's a fire, right? So it's this notion of stop, and in a meditation context, we're taking that sacred pause, taking a break from the noise of the world, the stories of the mind, to get grounded, focused, and fully present. So the first kind of phase or process is stop, and their practices associated with stopping, and then drop, right? So dropping down into soul level experiencing, the core of your being, deepening attunement with self, with others, with nature, with spirit. And then in that dropping, there's a metabolizing. It's not stagnant. There's an activity that's happening of our somatic, emotional, mental, spiritual energy, and transforming that into something that we can use and feed into our lived experience, which kind of transitions into role, right? So role is how those processes manifest in how you live in the world, this sense of freedom and flow. So the next few slides, and again, in the service of time, I'm not gonna be able to kind of walk through these, but with each of the stop, drop, and roll phases, and again, I use this to teach. What is meditation? What do you do during meditation, particularly this soulfulness approach to meditation? We stop, we drop, and we roll. And you'll see suggested practices for each of the three phases, as well as intentions and principles, right? So the intention is, what are we trying to do, right? What are we moving toward doing in each of these phases? So this notion of commencement is an intention, right? And the principles, born again, all things new. What is the principle that we're trying to accomplish? And if you'll notice, the languaging of the principles is intentionally to resonate perhaps more significantly in an African-American cultural context, right? Notion of slow your roll, or don't get it twisted. But these can be shifted based on the culture and context that you're working with. So again, the drop, the core processes, suggested practices, and then intentions and principles. And you'll notice that the 8 C's of soulfulness are incorporated here. So I find that in teaching, what are we doing in meditative or contemplative processes? When I'm teaching that to people, that dividing those into stop, drop, and roll is often a way for it to be received in a way that feels congruent. So you can just look through some of the intentions and principles, suggested practices, right? So a main element of, or a main application of the soul-centered practice framework are these guided soulfulness meditations, these soulitations. And there's some general soulitations, breaths, clearing, grounding, conscious centering breaths, and I have a guided meditation process for that. And then I have a series of theme-focused guided meditations that center in on a particular theme for the process. Some of those are listed here. And then these soul word meditations. I did the soul one in the first webinar. So the breath exercises, I have a process that I use to walk, kind of guide people through these 4 types of breathing and integrating this sense of liberation and intentionality, and also coming home is really thematic, using the breath as a path home. Another practice is what I call the soul circle practice. And it's a refuge practice, or some of you may be familiar with the term resourcing, cultivating, activating inner resources to draw upon as sources of resilience. And the soul circle practice is a visualization. I consider it a refuge practice. It's a visualization. And you know, we carry our historical, personal, vicarious, and collective experience within us. And it can show up as trauma sometimes. And we want to always keep that in mind in terms of how we do guided work with people, how we do visualizations with people, but also these internal experiences can serve as sources of strength. And so I will often start the soul circle process with a particular song by a very powerful artist. And I don't think we have time for me to play the whole song, but I'll play a little bit of it. Some of the lyrics are here. But again, this is to bring us into this practice of establishing connection with inner resources, establishing a connection with resources that can serve as a place of refuge for us.
We may be bruised, but we are not broken. We may be wounded, but we are not weak. The cut is deep, so the heart is wide open. Struck a nerve that's centuries deep. And I can hear them whispering. I can feel them with me.
So again, this song is a transition. It's an entry into the process of the soul circle visualization. And basically, in this process, we're inviting people to visualize first a place, a gathering place. And it is we ask people to bring to mind a place. It could be in nature, it could be a local place, it could be a place in their imagination where they feel a sense of safety, right? And to really visualize that space and then begin to construct a circle, invite a circle, call a circle of resources. And we walk through the different categories of resources, which include a higher power or representation of spirituality, ancestors not known to you, ancestors known to you, a community of belonging will be invited to join the circle. Lived experiences and expressions, which could include things like music, books, as well as memories of experiences that were safe and protected. Could be artwork that is invited into the circle. So we're creating this circle of not just people resources, but anything that brings that sense of connection, safety, love, support, strength, resilience. We invite loved ones, significant people, as well as elements of the natural world, including animals, pets, animals that one identifies with, or aspects of nature, trees, flowers, the sun, and calling the circle, really connecting, acknowledging who and what has joined the circle, thanking those elements for being there, really listening to the messages they have for you, and then joining the circle and returning. So it's a visualization process that helps to cultivate that inner sense of refuge. Another practice that we do is really there's a set of practices based on the South African greeting of Sawubona. And I'm, again, looking at the time, I'm going to move towards wrapping up, but I want to share a little bit about this. So Sawubona is a greeting in South Africa that really means we see you. People often interpret it as I see you, but I see you, emphasizing the see. It's a powerful affirmation of another person's humanity beneath, beyond appearances, seeing the truth of the person through the expression of communal ancestral knowing. So it reflects the depth of our connectedness with each other. And it's fundamentally a practice that affirms humanity and resists participation of dehumanizing dynamics that sees people as part human being, or objectifies, or just projects and renders the wholeness of one's humanity invisible. So Sawubona practices are about that affirmation of the truth of who we are. And we do them communally, interactively. There's one that I developed called the Sawubona Visit, and it's a guided solitation. And this one is about visiting yourself. Right? So greeting yourself. Meditation can be thought of as visiting with yourself. So it's bringing that energy of I see you towards yourself. I hear you. I feel you towards yourself. And another example of a soulward practice is center, this recentering. Again, I'm just going to highlight a few more things. I wanted to spend a moment talking about the complexity of bringing culture into contemplative practices. And this has really been the center of my professional career, is considering culture and diversity, particularly in my setting in psychotherapy and in training psychologists and mental health professionals. So this notion of bringing consideration of culture into our work is I think important for our interventions to be relevant, effective, inclusive. And we can think about incorporating culture not only as adapting interventions that are already there, that's sort of the culturally adapted approach, but also thinking about starting with the culture of the group that we're intervening with, or teaching, or applying to. It is, and I'll give this quick metaphor. A former student of mine, and I always give her credit, Goni Bissell, gave this metaphor in this sociocultural class in our doctoral program at Pepperdine. And she said, it's like trying to get across an ocean. And cultural adaptation is where you start with a car, and then you trick out the car to get it across the ocean. But it started off as a car. So you can get across the ocean when you adapt and trick out the car. But maybe a better way to get across the ocean is to think about the qualities of the ocean, right? And build something that is most responsive to those qualities. And that's what we mean by a culturally specific approach. So the soulfulness interventions are really about attending to the integration of culture in culturally centered, culturally adaptive, and in culturally specific ways. So another kind of really important issue, and clearly it's more complex and nuanced than can be covered here. And I just, again, saw the time. I'm so sorry. We're not going to have time for questions, but I am going to invite you to email me. But take a look at this slide. We really need to be careful and think critically and carefully about what it means to use expressions and elements from a cultural group that isn't our own. And I have a little resource here for you of questions to ask yourself if you are thinking of integrating culture into your work. And I think these are really, really important questions. So I want to leave you with this soul-centered metta practice. Many of you are familiar with metta loving kindness practice. So this is my offering to you. May peace and love wash over you, replenishing, refreshing, and nourishing your soul. May you be safe and protected. May you know your soul's refuge, that inner sanctuary untouched by circumstances. May you be well in body, mind, heart, and soul. May you feel the vitality of your life energy and the inner aliveness of your soul. May you know true happiness. May you feel your soulful joy, that radiant glow within that ignites your soul's expression. May you love and be loved. May love and compassion warm your heart and soothe your soul. May you experience inner peace, harmony, and balance. May you access that deep reservoir of peace within your soul. May you wake up to truth. May the light of truth open your eyes and illuminate your soul. And may you rise up and be free. May any part of your being that is imprisoned be liberated into full realization of your soul's calling. May you be free. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shelly. Clearly, we need more than 2 webinars with you, so maybe we'll have to have a full day event sometime. So we are pretty much at time, but if you have the time and a few folks want to stay on, there were 2 questions that came in that I thought might be interesting to answer live. If you have the time for that.
Yes, I can, we can take a couple minutes.
Okay.
That's fine.
So I'll start reading these, and if a few more trickle in, we'll see what we can do. So the first question that came in was, being faculty at a predominantly white institution, how is your work viewed and evaluated upon, both by white students and faculty? Have you done qualitative research on the soulfulness practice and its benefits both in teaching and your role as a psychotherapist?
That's a great question. So, you know, soulfulness is an extension of work I've been doing throughout my career of teaching and training on the integration of culture into, particularly, again, psychologically based interventions. And, you know, my career has predominantly been in predominantly white institutions where my students have been predominantly white and my colleagues have been predominantly white. And I've trained psychologists at VA hospitals, in student counseling centers, in all kinds of settings. And those have been predominantly white as well. And, you know, this lands differently depending on where people are. So one of the things that I always kind of use as a kind of guiding mantra for myself is to try to meet people where they are. So depending on who I'm speaking with, I'll enter this discussion and an introduction of culture from different places to try again to be responsive. It doesn't always land well. You know, I've also done this work outside of psychology. I developed some curriculum for the Museum of Tolerance here in Los Angeles, and worked with police officers, worked with teachers, worked with government workers, You know, been on the receiving end of a lot of hostility in those kinds of settings. But, you know, I do feel that people generally recognize when you're coming from a place of, you know, love and intention to respect and see their humanity, as well as an invitation for them to see mine and those of diverse groups and persons they may come in contact with. So it's a challenge that I just keep working with. And I think I also think about the idea of planting seeds. And I don't always see when those seeds, you know, blossom, or if they do. You know, clearly you plant a seed, it needs additional water and sun and all of those things. And you know, what I'm doing sometimes is just planting the seed, and I don't know if and how that's going to get water and sun after I leave. You know, we certainly in our program at Pepperdine have worked really hard to integrate multiple points of water and sun into the seeds that are planted in our courses throughout the curriculum. And when I do consultations with organizations, I emphasize that any practice or any workshop, whether it's an hour, 4 hours a day, or a week, it needs continuing nurturing and nourishment to grow. So, you know, I haven't done any qualitative research, you know, with the practices specifically. That's something I want to do in terms of soulfulness. I mean, certainly there's evaluations. I've been doing meditations in a Black-owned health food restaurant this summer on Saturday mornings, and I have intentionally gotten evaluations. So there's some qualitative feedback there, but I'm continuing to develop. So thank you for that question.
Thank you so much for that response as well, and that lovely metaphor. So the next question and final question is the soul circle a culminating event or something that you use throughout your workshops, classes, etc. when you use it? When do you use it? Sorry.
Yes. So I've used the soul circle as the sort of center of a particular class or event. And it can be done, you know, in about an hour well. It can be done in a little less time, not so well. But I've also used it as the centerpiece and organizing framework in terms of refuge and resourcing. I've used it in longer events, half-day events. I'm actually thinking about, I do a summer workshop as part of my practice, summer meditation workshop each season, and the summer one is coming up, and I'm you know, going to focus it on the soul circle, and that's about a 6-hour workshop. So it can be done as a single meditation that's incorporated into a larger event, or it can be thematic in terms of its role as a refuge and resourcing practice. And what I'd like to say too is, you know, this is all in development. I'm thinking there will be a soul-centered practice framework 2.0 that I'll roll out in 2020, because as I've been developing the soulfulness approach, I've been working with culture all my career, but I've been developing this soul-centered work. You know, you implement something and you get feedback, both organically and directly. And so there's a need for shifting and modifying. And I've already done some of that. So the practices are also in development and shift and tweak as with each implementation. So I really see this as a work in progress, and that the implementations have to be modified to take into account the culture and context of who we're serving. Thank you for that question.
Yes, and thank you again for a wonderful response. And Shelly, thank you for sharing your work with us today.
My pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you everyone for joining us. I just saw another question come in, but unfortunately we're going to have to close out for today. But I will share that question with Shelly post webinar. I want to remind everyone that this webinar has been recorded and it'll be available on the website pretty soon. Our webinars are made possible by your support, and we invite you to make a donation and check out our extensive webinar archive, including Shelly's previous webinar at contemplativemind.org. I'm going to sign off now. Thank you again, Shelly, and thank you, everyone. Be well.
Be well.